Hello, scholars. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite pieces of punctuation, the apostrophe. To remind you that things can always get worse, we have for your visual entertainment pictures of medieval torture. Now, let's get to know this little apostrophe a little bit better. In the 16th century is when we first saw it appear as a piece of punctuation. From Greek, it means to turn away. Apo means from, and strophe means turn. And in the very beginning, it had one simple use, which was to replace letters that had been taken out. Normally, this happened when authors were trying to make their words look like people actually talked. For example, in this line from Shakespeare, you have some things that would not have been pronounced, and they're readily replaced with apostrophes. Life was simple, and the apostrophe did a fantastic job with its one little job. However, in the 17th century, things got a little bit more difficult. We come up with this very strange, uniquely English idea of the singular possessive being expressed with an apostrophe S. It is very, very strange. What does an apostrophe S have to do with ownership? When we compare it to other languages like Spanish, which literally translated would say, this is the bike of John, or something like that. Most other languages have something a little bit more logical. English has an apostrophe S, and that complicates things in many ways. There's only one theory that I'm aware of for how this could have happened. It's called the his theory, and what that says is that earlier in the language we would have said this is John his bike, which was eventually shortened into John's bike. However, wherever it came from, this is where things got especially complicated, because we quickly realized that not only do we add an S for possession, we also add an S to make things plural. One bike, two bikes. So all of a sudden we have lots of S's at the end of the word. And is it showing possession or plural? Apparently there was some concern over whether or not we'd be able to get our point across. So in the 18th century, grammarians decided that we needed to distinguish between plural possessives and singular possessives. So in this sentence, the boys' uniforms are dirty. It's clear from the apostrophe we're talking about several boys, and all of their uniforms are dirty. If it was apostrophe S, it would be one boy with many uniforms. I'm not entirely convinced that this is necessary for comprehension, and given that I would roughly estimate only 1% of the English-speaking population can use S apostrophes correctly, that seems to say to me it's perhaps not that necessary. In the 19th and 20th century, things just went totally crazy. Of course, we kept contractions and possession. We also have this strange idea of time or quantity, which some would argue belongs with possession. 1 week's time, whose time, week's time, it all gets kind of weird here. Omission of figures and dates, that kind of ties in with the whole contraction issue and is fairly consistent. However, look at this. This is really where grammarians lost their minds. When we pluralize letters, we're going to use an apostrophe S now. So in some cases, apostrophe S the apostrophe is used to distinguish possession from pluralization, and now we're using it to actually make something plural. Or the plural of words that we're isolating and talking about. The do's and the don'ts. Notice this apostrophe T, apostrophe S, that is kind of cool, I have to admit. Irish names, which Irish people are not a contraction. We see apostrophes appearing in strange English, like when people are trying to create dialect, but the apostrophe here isn't really taking the place of any letters. It seems to maybe join parts of weird words together. O'clock, and then as if the apostrophe didn't have enough to do, we just went ahead and signed it the meaning of feet when we were talking about measurements. All of this, I hope that it creates a great deal of sympathy in your mind for the apostrophe. As you can see, it's working awfully hard with some pretty unreasonable and contradictory expectations. Let's just take a moment of sympathy for the apostrophe. Poor, poor thing. Okay, some funny apostrophe mistakes that might entertain you a little bit. Real errors that were included in the advertisement. Here, Prudential, an insurance company, says, "We're here to care for you," as in they're not here anymore. The pupil's entrance indicates that there's only one entrance here. The clothing company, Land's End. Of course, the expression Land's End would mean you've kind of come to the Land's End, one Land's End, but they insist on having the apostrophe after the S, which indicates that many lands are ending, but it seems unlikely that if two lands are ending, then really the land is just continuing, right? New members welcome drink. In this case, welcome becomes a verb. What do new members do? They welcome drink, as opposed to being the drink for the new members. And then finally, to prove that people who understand apostrophes will win out in the end, in North Carolina, there was a sign put up in a restaurant that had the N-words out, and they put the apostrophe in on the sign, which made it a contraction, meaning the N-word is out. And some very clever person who understood apostrophes better than the sign creator came back and wrote, "But he'll be back shortly." And thanks to civil rights and common sense, of course, that was true. Okay, the steps. So here's what you need to do. This is where you need to take careful notes. Everything before this was just for your entertainment. But in your notes, you need to write down the steps. They have changed from a couple of years ago. Step number 1, determine possession. We're going to ask whose. Don't start putting an apostrophe every time you see an S. Step 2, determine type. We're going to ask if it's singular, a plural that ends in S, or a plural that does not end in S. And then finally, we're going to apply the rule. 3 simple steps to determine if you need an apostrophe, and then if it goes before the S or after the S. Okay, the first thing to wrap your head around, my fault. Here are the rules. Rule number 1, if it's singular, use apostrophe S. Rule number 2, if it's a plural that does not end in S, use apostrophe S. And rule number 3, if it's a plural that ends in S, use S apostrophe. Okay, I just want to take note, there is a school of thought that says if it's a singular that ends in S, you would not use the S apostrophe, you would use S apostrophe. My feelings on this are pretty straightforward. First off, I like fewer rules. So I like the idea of everything singular just being apostrophe S. And then secondly, very often we add a syllable when we add possession. So, for example, if you weren't thinking about it, you would most likely say, "This is James's bike." You would not say, "This is James' bike." And I like having the apostrophe S to somehow stand for the sound that we're creating with our mouths. Same here, you would not say, "This is the class homework." You would say, "This is the class's homework." Okay, now, plurals that end in S and plurals that don't. Thanks to the many sources of the English language, we have different kinds of plurals. Most of the time, we form a plural by adding S. 1 boy, 2 boys. However, very often, and especially with some of our most common words, we form a plural by doing different things. In terms of the apostrophe, we've got to figure out whether it ends in S or not as a plural. Now, keep in mind, on the paper it will have the S. You have to step back and ask yourself, what kind of plural is it? You have to force yourself to say, I encourage you to hold up your fingers, 1, 2. So for example, the first one, 1 child, 2 children. That does not end in S, that belongs over here. 1 bird, 2 birds. That ends in S, belongs over here. 1 slipper, 2 slippers. That goes over here. 1 man, 2 men. That comes from our Scandinavian heritage, the changing of the vowel to make a plural. 1 goose, 2 geese. That does not end in S. 1 moose, 2 moose. Doesn't change, it goes over here. 1 horse, 2 horses. 1 mouse, 2. Now, if we're talking about the animal, it would go over here. 1 mouse, 2 mice. If we're talking about the computer apparatus, it would go over here. 1 mouse, 2 mouses. 1 store, 2 stores. 1 deer, 2 deer. Does not change. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we're dealing with plurals that end in S and plurals that don't. Okay, here's just a little clip from online. Let's look at all the cool things happening with apostrophes on this page. Look here. Hikers release delayed. From the S apostrophe, we know that there was more than one hiker involved in this. Whose release? The hiker's release. One hiker, two hikers. So it's a plural that ends in S. So it's going to be S apostrophe. Obama's honeymoon. There's only one Obama, so it's apostrophe S. Whose honeymoon? Obama's honeymoon. Let's see. Other apostrophes? Nope. We're all good. Here we have an oh, this is nice. Whose proposed Buffett rule? Obama's. There's only one Obama, so it's apostrophe S. But whose tax rates? Millionaires. One millionaire, two millionaires. It's a plural that ends in S, so that's why we have the S apostrophe. Okay, so all kinds of neat stuff happening with apostrophes. All right, let's see how it works. Okay, what you're going to do when you're doing your homework, I'm going to give you a sentence. The student's fears materialized. This is what you're going to write in your homework. A 4-step process. First, you're actually going to type whose fears? Students' fears, so students gets the apostrophe. Secondly, you're going to determine the type. It's a plural that ends in S. One student, two students. 3, you're going to apply the rule. The rule is S apostrophe. And the 4th line, you're going to write the sentence correctly. The student's fears materialized. That's the correct sentence. So, for your homework, I need to see all 4 of these typed out in their entirety every time. Okay, time for a little bit of practice. Of course, you can access this presentation for the sentences, and we will work with these sentences in class. Hope you enjoyed the little apostrophe presentation. We'll see you in class.